This is a review slash rant slash discussion about Cyberpunk 2077, one of the most hyped up games in recent video game history. Note, I played the entirety of the game on PC, majority on patches 1.03 and 1.04. I've had over 80 hours into the game, completed the main campaign, did most of the side jobs, which are the higher quality side missions, and have even completed most of the gigs, which are the mainly busy work and throwaway fetch quests. More on that later. I've also seen the majority of the endings, so in my opinion, I have played the game thoroughly enough to give it an adequate review and analysis. Unlike many of the so-called game journalists that put out a day zero or day one review of the game by just blowing through the story, or some of them didn't really even play it. As a disclaimer, this is the first game that I have pre-ordered in years, so there was some expectation of high quality going in. Luckily though, I managed to avoid most of the pre-release marketing and press coverage prior to playing the game, save for one or two trailers, so I didn't really have that monumental hype that came in with following all the crazy press coverage. Just something to keep in mind as I talk about how I experienced the game for the first time. I really don't like all this focus on bugs in the game as well. Sure, the bugs stick out, they hamper the experience of the game, and they really don't have any good reason for being so numerous in a full-priced AAA game. It's really inexcusable, to be honest. But at least these things can be fixed, so I won't spend much time on the bugs, because I think in due time they will probably be fixed. And there are already tons of videos online that documented the various bugs across YouTube and Reddit. And more on this later, but I think focusing on the bugs takes away from where the real point of criticism should be towards the game. That many of the mechanics and design decisions are severely broken or limited. These issues become egregious after spending some significant time in the city and are baffling after I started researching the marketing coverage and sales pitch CDPR made to customers throughout the game's development all the way up until release. But again, more on that later. I don't want this review to be all negative, as I did genuinely enjoy the game, especially towards the beginning. I thought the combat for the most part was fun, especially trying out new weapons, and some of the guns like shotguns and revolvers had a certain oomph that made hitting enemies satisfying. There was also some great innovations like the tech shotgun and the smart weapons that I thought, just trying out the different types did really liven up the gameplay and variety. I also enjoyed the game's side missions. There were a few standout ones that were far better than the game's main story missions. And some of them had a lot of accompanying lore, and it wasn't just simple fetch quests, or even when they were just simple fetch quests, a lot of story context was given behind them. So it made it feel unique. The music was also great. The soundtrack seemed to fit the mood and ambience of what was happening most of the time. I really appreciated the dynamic fight tracks that seemed to change with the location. Or maybe it was the enemy types, I'm not too sure about it. But that really got me into the vibe of the setting and also what was going on screen. The aesthetics and art style were also top notch. When this game is running smoothly without any technical hiccups or glitches, it is probably the best looking game out, and the cyberpunk aesthetic was very convincing if you were just looking at it on a surface level. There were also some pretty decent supporting characters. I thought a few of them were incredibly well written, and the voice acting for the most part was high quality. Even Keanu Reeves surprised me. I thought he did a great job in his role as Johnny Silverhand. I really did grow attached to his character by the end of the game, and I thought he had a great story arc. The main story itself did have some issues with pacing, which was exacerbated by the fact that you're supposed to complete side missions before completing the main story, so it often felt disjointed and just oddly paced depending on how you approached the game. But for the most part, the story hit the right notes, and it had a generally satisfying ending, depending on what ending you picked. As a story-focused game, I thought it was a pretty solid release overall. If you manage to avoid all the marketing material that this company put out, keep your expectations low, don't compare this to GTA, don't look at this game as an actual role-playing game, have a mid to high-end PC, and manage to wait until February or March, I think you will be in for quite a treat. I'm not sure how many people actually match all these criteria, but if this is you, then I'll just stop this video, wait until February, and come back and watch this after you complete the game. I'd appreciate a like though before you go. So now I'm going to talk about some more of my criticism, and this is going to have quite a bit of spoilers, as this is not a spoiler-free review slash rant. Maybe I should have mentioned that before. As good as this game may be, as an action title, this game calls itself an open world game. The open world is Night City, which is admittedly incredibly pleasing to the eye with its great aesthetic and details. But alas, like many things that are nice to look at in this world, it was extremely dull and superficial after you spent some extended period of time inside of it. The world brings back memories of the world of EOS, the world of Final Fantasy 15, which also had scenic views but little else to offer.
It's all a facade.
The random NPCs that populate the world do very little except maybe say 1 or 2 lines of random dialogue when you interact with them, and they also run away or cower in fear if anything remotely dangerous happens. I'm talking if you perform a dodge near them, they will react the same as if you pull out a gun and start firing into a crowd, and when they cower in fear they do so indefinitely. Unless they disappear altogether from your sight. Sometimes when you turn away, nobody but the cops and criminals will pick a fight with you, which just doesn't make sense according to the game's lore. Practically everyone in Night City is supposed to be packing heat. They sell weapons and vending machines. There should be random NPCs that get pissed at you and fight back once in a while. Some of my best memories in Grand Theft Auto, a game that Cyberpunk seems to try to emulate in so many ways, were the random fistfights I got into with random pedestrians. They were hilarious, felt completely spontaneous, and made the pedestrians seem very real, as not all of them would fight. Some would run away, whilst others would pull out a weapon and shoot at you. Then there are the cops, which are practically useless. There are no patrolling cop cars in the city, and the wanted system is completely broken. You commit crimes that I'm actually not sure of. The police seem to have an inconsistent set of rules they follow. Sometimes they shoot at you for looking at them. Other times they seem to ignore you, and it was completely arbitrary and inconsistent. I don't know, maybe it's emulating real life, not sure. However, the cops spawn right near you when you do commit a crime. But all you have to do most of the time is just turn a corner and run, and they won't follow you. Better yet, just get in a car and drive away because they won't give chase. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in a game setting where there are flying cars, technological wonders, and authoritarian-like oversight from corporations and the local government, there is no way to chase down a criminal if he or she gets in a car. What's terrible is that they even show off max tac. They're basically like a SWAT team jumping out of flying cars in the beginning of the game during a cinematic. They're teased like they may play some sort of role in the game as potentially an antagonizing force, but they really don't appear in the game afterwards. And if you go on a rampage, these guys can't even chase you in a car. Speaking of cars, this is probably related to the previous point, but the pathfinding for cars seems to be broken as well. If you stop in front of a car, they don't really have a way to drive around you and even just drive through, which is strange in a world of advanced AI and technology. Again, hate to bring it back to GTA and compare, but the drivers actually responded to you in that game. And in this game, they seem to be on rails that can do nothing but stop outside of scripted action set pieces, which are the scenes you see in the trailers. I did think though that the game had pretty good shooting mechanics. At least they were fun for me. I don't play primarily FPS games like COD or Battlefield, but I thought Cyberpunk was pretty fun. But the AI is, again, pretty bad. Enemies don't often take cover, or even if they do, they'll leave a part of their body, a lot of times their heads, exposed. In my experience, they'll never really flank you either, instead opting to charge idiotically straight into your hail of gunfire. They also don't know how to handle tech weapons, as these bullets can often shoot through cover if charged up, and I found that once an enemy crouches behind cover, they won't move from that spot as you continue to charge up and fire shot after shot until they die. The boss battles I also thought were pretty underwhelming. Most of the time they were just bullet sponges that hit a little bit higher. The only interesting boss battles that I thought stuck out to me were some of the side missions had you chasing cyber psychos, which are basically over augmented people. But in this main story mission, there was maybe only 1 or 2 boss battles that I thought were interesting, and you probably have already seen those in the trailers. And speaking of trailers, this brings me to the elephant in the room: the game's marketing, hype, expectations, and resulting disappointment it created. Much of this game was just trailer bait. There were moments they showed off in trailers that made you think you'd be experiencing them, but instead were just short cutscenes or montages. That Jackie montage is one that comes to mind. All of this footage that you're seeing, you don't really play, you're just watching it, but watching the trailer makes you think you're actually experiencing these moments. And a lot of these features are actually just missing in the game itself. Marketing and hype hurt this game's reputation and the reputation of CDPR at large far more than bugs could ever. The amount of missing or half-baked features in this game are astonishing. It boggles my mind that a game with this budget, development time of nearly 8 years, and hype has botched so many things. I could probably create an entire series on this, but a few that I would like to quickly go through are hacking. This feature was criminally underutilized. Don't get me wrong, hacking is a viable option in this game when dealing with enemies. I even think it's slightly OP, especially if you combine it with stealth. I found that I could take out crowds of enemies without a fight using quick hacks, and I didn't spec out my character for hacking, but it feels half-baked. I often never had issues just going around and hacking enemies, even when enemy netrunners, who are supposed to be hackers themselves. I didn't really find any type of counterbalance or counter issues with using hacking even when these netrunners were around. They did very little to counter and stop me, and the entire system just felt pretty shallow. It was mainly point and click, and it reminded me a lot of Watch Dogs 1. Hacking wasn't all that bad though when you compare it to stealth. I found stealth, like the pure stealth builds, to be very boring and tedious, as once one enemy discovers you, everyone knows your location and it just transitions to full-on combat. But then again, I didn't really put too many points into stealth after a while, or the perks, so it is possible that stealth improves as you invest completely into the skill tree, but I highly doubt it. To segue to skill trees, customization and character creation was another great blunder in my opinion. For example, take life paths. These are just 15-minute intro segments that have little effect on the story as a whole. They don't even affect your gameplay. 99% of the time, they just give you an extra dialogue option that grants you some flavor text, which is just an additional line of dialogue that helps give you more context to the conversation without having any sort of tangible benefit or consequence in the game. I'm going to get into more theories later on, but I honestly think some of these life path missions, especially the corporal life path, were just missions in the planned main story maybe years ago that was later transposed into a life path after the story was cut down. Just know that this feature was overhyped and honestly doesn't warrant an additional playthrough.
It's all a facade.
Like how they originally advertised. You can also physically customize your character through the game, though the game almost always stays in first person until the ending, so you don't get to see your character unless you're in the inventory screen or operating a vehicle in third person, which you almost have to do because driving in first person is impossible. The customization is fairly limited. You can't change the body type, and there are only a few options for facial hair. What's even worse is that V already seems to have a personality that we can have little effect upon, so this isn't really a blank slate like the Lone Wanderer from Fallout, or even Commander Shepard from Mass Effect. This is more like Geralt from The Witcher, but with less personality and character development. You do have several options for genitalia, however, and apparently this was really a hyped up and advertised feature in the game, so I guess this was CDPR's way of making up for this issue. The penis customization even includes size and if you're uncircumcised or not, but it is all basically a gimmick that was used as some sort of marketing tool, as this has no effect on gameplay whatsoever.
It's all a facade.
After selecting your genitalia, you don't even really see it unless you're back in the inventory screen and you strip your character naked or there's some sort of glitch, nor do you see it in any of the romance scenes. You can give your female character male genitals and vice versa if that floats your boat, but again, this really doesn't have any impact on the gameplay as far as I know. Also, once you create your character, there is no way to alter your looks afterwards. Not even hair, that's right. In a world where body modification and cyberware is the craze, and style seems to be everything in Night City, there are no barbers or body docs that can make you change up your aesthetics. It was very strange, though this isn't even the biggest flaw of the game. You do have the ability to tailor your created character and how you'll approach combat, however, through the use of attribute upgrades and perks. Though there are some speech checks that are only available if you have a certain amount in a particular stat, 99% of the time this is also just flavor text like you'll find with life paths. This isn't like Wasteland, Mass Effect, or even Fallout. Regardless, there are perks, attributes, and cybernetics that will allow you to tailor what your character is good at in combat, though most of this stuff is just passive bonuses, and there aren't very many things you can do with character customization that will alter the way you approach missions. Certain things will just be easier for you and more efficient. And I found towards the end of the game, at least, it really didn't matter. As I mentioned before, I didn't really spec my character for quick hacks, but I found it easy enough to do quick hacks and use hacking to get rid of a lot of the trash mobs found in the mid-game towards the end of the game as well. Unfortunately, cybernetics was another wasted opportunity in the game. In the lore and tabletop game that this video game is based upon, there is a cost to equipping body modifications, and there are even characters in the game that mention cyberpsychosis, so there was a huge potential for presenting players with a dilemma between equipping powerful mods and losing humanity, as this is a consequence of equipping all these cybernetics. This is already already a mechanic in the tabletop game. This would have been a great opportunity to tie in MaxTac, who specialized in taking down cyber psychos, and it would have been an interesting angle they went with in the story. You don't get that in this game. Instead, what we got was a side mission that has us hunting cyber psychos throughout the map, which acts as like a bounty hunter mission type of quest, side quest, like in Assassin's Creed, where you chase down those high-level enemies for mini-boss encounters. I have to admit, some of these fights were interesting, and there is some lore and text regarding each one, trying to give you some context over how this person got into this situation. But after completing them all, you would think there was some sort of reward or story thing that you would get, but instead, you just get a short text message from your mission handler, and that is all. No story segment, no cutscene. It was like it didn't even matter that you did this. You went all over the map to hunt these things down, and nothing changed. There are tons of moments like this in this game. You spare a corpo after interrogating them or shoot them in the head. It doesn't matter. There's a part in the game where you're presented with an opportunity to kill off the bosses of the Voodoo Boys, who are one of the major gangs in Night City. They're supposed to be tech wizards, but after massacring a large group of them in my playthrough, along with their elite key players, there was no real consequences in the game from doing it. If I kept them alive or tagged them all, it just didn't matter either way. Not even in the section of Night City called Pacifica, which is supposed to be their territory. Even GTA 2, yes, GTA 2, a game that came out 21 years ago and 3 console generations back, or 4, depending on how you're counting them, had better mechanics than this. Look how after you complete a mission, your standing goes up with the gangs. I remember in GTA 2, that would affect how they would react to you in the open world, depending on your standing with the gang and your actions. But in this high budget game that came out 21 years later, there's simply no mechanics for that. Romance is also a joke. There is realistically one romance option for you, depending on your character's gender and sexual persuasion. Just one romance option. Mass Effect, Dragon Age Origins, even Assassin's Creed puts this game to shame in that respect. It's really strange to me that the vast majority of this game's target audience are straight males, but they're only given one romantic option. And that option that they were given isn't really a stable relationship option, as Panam, the only female love interest for a hetero male V, leaves Night City as soon as you complete the romance mission chain. The romances also do very little, aside from a very short and tasteless sexual encounter, and a small, short story segment in the ending. No other tangible benefits, no going on dates or anything else. It is just simply another wasted opportunity.
It's all a facade.
And just as a side note, I did notice on Reddit and YouTube that a lot of the quote-unquote SJW woke crowd lambasted this company, CDPR, for certain stances that it took with the game design during the game development. And it seemed like CDPR embraced this quote-unquote rebel attitude, which caused many consumers to think that the company was brave and unique in a sea of corporate conformists that bend the knee to the quote-unquote woke crowd. After playing the game, however, I feel like this was all just posturing and virtue signaling, as the game certainly has its own woke moments injected into it, oftentimes feeling very shoehorned for certain characters. It isn't game breaking or as bad as other games, but it's just another blemish against CDPR and their marketing campaign. And that brings me to my final point, the marketing and hype for this game. If you have been following media around launch day, you will know that CDPR did some very grimy business regarding reviews and information regarding this game, especially for the consoles. No current gen PS4 or Xbox One gameplay was ever displayed in all of the Night City wire press releases or trailers or any other segment bits that even YouTubers might have covered. Instead of giving people real gameplay, they were given pre-rendered trailer bait of Keanu Reeves and footage of modifying penis sizes and promises of a game that we just didn't get. It wasn't just CDPR's marketing team either. A lot of the YouTubers that covered this game really did hype this game up to monumental levels, but that's a topic for another day. From a company that I respected after playing the Witcher series, I realized that they are the same, if not worse, than the other AAA game developers. At least other dumpster fires like Fallout 76, Anthem, and the Avengers had an open beta. People knew what they were getting themselves into before buying, whereas many purchasers of Cyberpunk 2077, especially the console buyers, took time off at work perhaps and got themselves a broken game with severely lacking features. Whatever backlash the company is receiving right now from the public, I think is completely warranted. They deceive people that trusted them for their hard-earned cash. I usually don't like when companies are hurting, but I have to admit I was happy to hear when Sony pulled this game off their platform. And I would be very relieved if this company burned to the ground from been the result of all this. At least then companies would learn that you shouldn't do these type of underhanded tactics. But I know that's probably not going to happen. The worst thing about all this, however, is that these underhanded tactics, for the most part, worked. The game sold extremely well, even with all the refunds and controversy surrounding it. The game made the company money, and oftentimes that is all that matters. Believe me, other companies are going to take note. Other companies will see that a strong enough hype team made up of YouTubers and marketers can oftentimes create more revenue than creating an actual good product. What is also a crime is that a lot of these same media outlets that praise this game are just focusing on the game's bugs and glitches and say this game is brilliant otherwise. They're glossing over the fact that this game is subpar in so many aspects. Other AAA devs will unfortunately try to replicate this process, albeit with less controversy and mess, I'm sure, with a less broken game, but the trend of lacking in innovation and missing features will probably continue. It is very disappointing and sad because the game showed hints of being the game that it advertised itself as, especially towards the beginning, as you were given options and different choices for various missions, and it gave you this sense of wonder when you first entered Night City that they should have really followed through with, but instead it fell way short of the expectations that it set for itself. With all that being said, the game is not a bad game. It is definitely a decent game, especially if you have an adequate PC and you're not thinking that this is an RPG. This is not an RPG. This is an action adventure title in a vacuum without all the marketing and hype. If I had to assign this game a score, I would give it a 6.5. Or even 7 in the state that I played it in. Looking back, I wish CDPR just stuck to what it was good at and fleshed out the story and main character, perhaps ignoring a lot of the side content and potential character customization and open world features that it seemed to advertise, just to make this a more story-focused game, more akin to Deus Ex or the most recent God of War, or even just The Witcher. V, the main character, didn't feel like a character that you stepped in their shoes and roleplayed as. They were already a complete character that probably should have just been pre-made, as we had little effect on his or her development. So instead, I think we should have just got a complete V and then just had an opportunity to mess around with maybe, cosmetics and hair and just had a character. That way we should have had a more polished, story-focused game, because the choices they created for the player were very limited, most of them being false choices for flavor text anyways. I think the game would have been exponentially better if it just stuck to a more narrative approach. Games like CDPR's own Witcher, Deus Ex, Sleeping Dogs, God of War, and Grand Theft Auto did the open world story driven game way better than Cyberpunk. I would be interested in knowing what happened during the development of this game. I honestly think they scrapped this project at least twice before giving us the game we received on the 10th of December, especially if you compare it to earlier marketing materials and the seemingly late addition of Keanu Reeves. Or maybe they were just lying the entire time. Maybe they never had a game that they were advertising as, and then they just did a late Hail Mary shuffle and got Keanu Reeves involved. Either way, it hurt the end product and the reputation of CDPR, as it advertised an immersive world and gave the impression that the player would experience a choose your own adventure type of open world game. And I honestly don't think more time and more delays would have helped the developers. Sure, a lot of the bugs probably would have been squashed, the game would have been more polished, but a lot of these mechanics seem like they're base level mechanics. Again, I'm not a computer programmer or anything, but there's a lot of missing features that appeared in the market material, and it seems like a completely different game that may or may not appear in a sequel or something. They already had close to 8 years to develop the game. I don't think 6 more months or even another year would have done anything significant. I do look forward to seeing how CDPR handles this mess and see what they do for the next 6 months to a couple years and where they go with the future of Cyberpunk. Because honestly, the world is very interesting and there's a lot of rich lore that should be explored. And I do want to see what kind of content they add next year, and I may personally revisit it after they clean up the game and they add some significant features and unpaid DLC that they spoke about. So I'll definitely be a lot more skeptical of them in the future. Maybe Cyberpunk Online will be their saving grace, but I really doubt it after this blunder. To close it all off, in my opinion, I don't think the game in its current state should be recommended to anyone, especially to people playing on console. Especially because the target audience for this game, the people that are into action adventure stories, will be distracted during many of the dramatic story moments, as those moments are often marred by visual bugs that really hurt the tempo and flow of the game. Even doubly so for anyone that was following any of the marketing material for the game. Playing the game for any extended period and developing any sort of expectations based off the marketing material will only set you up for a massive disappointment. However, if many of these bugs are ironed out and there's some more story-based content added in, I think the game would make a fine pickup on a discount. It just goes to show that pre-ordering games and playing games on day one is always a bad move now. CDPR said they would release this game when it was ready. Shame on them for lying to us.
It's all a facade.